Hello, BookTube. I have some comics to talk with you about today. That doesn't usually happen. I have fallen out of the habit of going to my LCS, my local comic shop. At first, I fell out of the habit because of my previous dogs, my previous two dogs, who are, those of you who have been with this channel for a very long time, if you watch some of those earliest videos, you'll see them, my beautiful pointer and my fat little basset hound. By the time I started this channel, they were both old, and my basset hound was weakening, noticeably weakening. And that gradually drew me in closer and closer to them. Errands started being something that I did only for mental self-preservation, and fewer of them. And then, in addition to weakening and aging, then the girls started dying, and I had to be here all the time. And as many people, many sociologists have pointed out, it doesn't take much to break a habit of routine. Physiological habits, drug habits are a different matter, but routine habits, I always go to this place, I always do this. It doesn't take much to break those and restructure them. And it kind of happened with me, with my comic shop going habits. I just sort of fell out of the habit of doing it. I confess, the fare that I was getting, the comics themselves, weren't helping much. And I've had intervals in between where I tried to get that love back, or I tried to be really interested in weekly comics, but even with multi-part, tension ratcheting storylines, I still mostly ended up losing interest. I don't know if maybe that's the comic book industry, or maybe I've just lost the knack. But then the pandemic struck, and I wasn't going anywhere that I didn't need to go, and all of my physical routines were shut down. For the first 4 months, everything was shut down. So I stopped going to my local comic shop. And even now, once things started to lift, not everything did, and not in the same way. So the comic shop just wasn't on my route, on any route. I would have to go there, leave the house, go there, turn around, and come back. And I just haven't made myself do that. And in the meantime, Mark Richardson of Riches and Reeds and his wonderful wife stepped into the breach. They have a local comic shop, same chain that I went to, up in Vermont. And they have cars, and they are out doing errands anyway. If you have 3 kids and jobs, you can't possibly stop doing errands. So gradually over time, I glommed onto that routine and started making little requests of my own. Could you pick up this or that for me? And they've been wonderful about it. And that has continued because even though more and more stuff has opened up here in Massachusetts, my comic shop, no comic shop, not just the old one, but any of them, no comic shop is really on any route that I would make. It would be a sore thumb type exposition, whereas for them it's not. So I have taken to rather presumptuously putting in little requests to them on a fairly weekly basis. And I got a bunch of stuff this week, a package that came in the mail. It was just delightful. So nice of them to do. And the thing that unites all 3 of the comics that I'm going to show you is that they're all first issues. I've mentioned before on this channel, and I mentioned on my blog, Steve Reads, before that the comic book industry is so speculation-driven, even after all this time. It's been, 30 years since the 90s? It's still so speculation-driven that companies are constantly coming out with #1 issues. I remember when that was really rare. Remember when Spectacular Spider-Man came out, #1, with Tarantula on the cover? How wow that felt. Wow. Second Spider-Man comic and a #1? Wow. But now it happens every week that you'll get a first issue. And I have 3 that I want to show you. I got 3 first issues that were sent to me in the mail from last week's comic book day. The first one is by Kurt Busiek, and the artist is Yildiray Sinar of the House of Moog. And this is The Marvels, #1, with a great Alex Ross cover. And the callback here with Kurt Busiek as the writer and with Alex Ross on the cover there is Marvels. The miniseries, the Marvel miniseries, the 4-issue miniseries called Marvels. It came out years and years and years ago. That is incredibly good. It's just amazingly good. A story of the chronology of the Marvel universe from World War II to roughly the 70s. And this is not that. This is, Kurt Busiek explains it. Eventually, he explains it in the course of this issue, which the cover is by Alex Ross, but the inner artwork is not by him. The inner artwork is still very, very good. But he explains in the course of this issue that this is a story about the Marvel Universe. So it's an adventure starring, we have the bad guy. That is the bad guy. He is a yuppie. The adventure is spanning the whole of time and space. So you have little 2-page segments here that jump all around in time. We open in 1947 Then the next one is 17 years ago, but we don't know the date. And then from there, we jump to 12 years ago. And there's Daredevil performing for the USO. And then, 2 pages later, we have 7 years ago. There's the classic Thor with the polka dots and the classic Iron Man. And then 10 days from now in near-Earth orbit with Captain America reading Tolkien. 10 days from now goes to 10 days still now. But it's only a couple of pages after that when we get... okay, there's now again, and then last night... see, some of the artwork, there's Spider-Man versus the Vulture. Very good stuff. No idea why the Vulture is wearing a helmet, a bulb, a dome over his head. I imagine that maybe that will be explained, or maybe not. Maybe it's just a vanity of the author. But you get the impression from the villain's, steepled fingers monologuing, that all of those time frames build towards each other, that they all build towards a plot line. We get cliffhangers in almost every one of those eras. For instance, when Captain America invades this ancient temple, what was this? What was the timestamp on this one? 10 days from now. When he invades that temple, he has a group of allies with him that he brings along. Naturally inducing a guessing game of some kind. I have no idea who that is. And this character right here is introduced in this issue and explained who he is, just an ordinary guy. That is the Black Cat, a dumb Marvel female character, just dumb as could be. And insulting, as so many Marvel female characters are. Her powers rely on luck. At least they don't rely on jewelry or makeup, but it's still not very good. But anyway, we also have Storm, who is a great Marvel female character. Isn't derivative of anybody, has a great backstory, is an individual on her own, not a ripoff of her cousin Bruce or anything like that. We have a Human Torch, but in Marvel continuity there are 3 of those. Like, for instance, at the very beginning, we see 2 Human Torches streaking through the air. Neither one of those is Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four. That is the original Human Torch, who was an android, and his mutant sidekick, the teenager Toro. And we don't know offhand who this is. Which of those? Is it Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four, or is it one of those other 2 torches? And with this character, a design that's very familiar from Dave Cockrum's sketchbook, but I don't know who this character is, then Iron Man, and also this character, who has the V right there is a kind of a giveaway, although it is a character redesign of a very interesting nature. That is probably the World War II era Vision. So not the android from the Avengers, but a different character who we don't learn all that much about, a quasi-mystical character who was one of the million superheroes that Timely Comics just threw at the wall, hoping that one of them would catch on. And this was good. It was good, but as a first issue, no, this is clearly the first chapter of a larger work that Kurt Busiek has written out and planned out, and this is going to play out over I don't know how many issues. It used to be that a miniseries would tell you, but this one doesn't. It just says issue number 1. It doesn't say issue number 1 of however many. So I don't know how long this series is going to go on, but I don't want any more copies of it because it isn't built to be single issues. This jumps all over creation, literally all over time in this issue. It's impossible for this thing to have any dramatic payoff for the reader. You can get a little 2-page bit, but you can get that anywhere. There is no coherent story in here, and the coherent story is not going to take place in the course of 2 issues or 3. It's going to take place over the arc of this whole thing, which is fascinating. I'm not discounting that at all, but it means I don't need the Marvels number 2. Absolutely not. I was curious about this, but it's not satisfying as an issue to read. A successful first issue will leave you with lots of questions, yes, but it will also satisfy you. It will have a dramatic cliffhanger. It will have a dramatic arc. It will involve you in one story. And the Marvels number 1 absolutely doesn't do that. The next number 1, does. This is Robin number 1, with a beautiful wraparound cover. Look at that. And this is the first issue of New Adventures of Batman's sidekick Robin, but not Dick Grayson, not the original Robin, and not any of the 3 or 4 Robins that have come in between. This is Damian Wayne, Bruce Wayne's natural son. not an adopted son, not a ward, not anything like that, but his actual son, who was trained by a league of assassins to be super proficient in unarmed combat and armed combat. So another big difference between him and the earlier Robins is that he's much more trained for the job, which which didn't seem to help him much, since he's one of two Robins that died on the job. But he came back. It's a long story. But one way or another, as this issue begins, Batman and his crew, there's Nightwing, who was the original Robin, there's the newest Robin, and Batgirl, and Oracle. They are concerned because Damian Wayne is missing, and has been missing for a little while. And they don't know where he is. He's totally off the grid. And it turns out that where he is he is trying to qualify for a massive kumite, a massive international sort of demi-monde fighting tournament for the deadliest unarmed combat fighters in the whole world. He's trying to qualify for that match. And look at it. The art was just incredible. Also the coloring. I mean, that's an inspired decision to make the knockout blow there red, to color that red. That's really good. That's really effective. And that runs throughout this issue. He does qualify, and he goes to an island. There's a great spread. Here, let me show it to you. Look at that. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? He goes to this island where all the other candidates are in order to line up for the fight. And he doesn't want, Damien is a very impetuous, very taut little asshole. he's not a nice character at all. He's not nice like the original Robin. He's not troubled like the second Robin. He's not nerdy and introspective like the third Robin. He's not anything like that. He's just an a-hole. He's totally sure of himself, totally arrogant, totally privileged, because he believes that unlike all the other Robins, he belongs there. He is Bruce Wayne's son. All that sort of stuff. It's wonderful. He's not a cookie cutter character at all. He's always entertaining to read about. And in this issue, he is characterized beautifully, just fantastically. He wants to hurry things along. He wants to hurry along this fighting so that he can win. He's sure that he will. And in his first fight, it certainly doesn't look like he wins. And that's wonderfully done. It ends on the mother of all cliffhangers, which is great. And then the first issue that I got is something I'm constantly bedeviling Mark in email. I swear he must be sorry that he gave me his email. I'm constantly asking him about comic books and whether or not his shop might get a certain out-of-the-way thing or a weird printing or something from a smaller publisher that I kind of want to try. And he and his wife are so indulgent of those little whims of mine. And they found something for me that I was really curious about. It's the Sumerian. Iron Shadows in the Moon. Again, a first issue. It's Conan the Barbarian. In the United States, this would get the Robert E. Howard estate on you in a New York minute. But outside of the United States, Conan is in the common domain. So his copyright is open, but not his trademark. That is the very intentionally murky ground where the two bleed into each other. So even though, these comics were originally published in France, and even though in France you can have a comic called The Sumerian, and inside you can refer to the character as Conan, and you can adapt Robert E. Howard stories, you can't call it Conan. Or even being in France might not protect you. And certainly if Ablaze Comics, Ablaze Comics. If you're Ablaze Comics, you are certainly not going to call something Conan the Barbarian in the American market, especially when Marvel just paid a very pretty penny to get the rights to Robert E. Howard back after having lost them for 50 years. You're certainly not going to do that. So they don't. Instead, they call this the Sumerian. Some of you who haunt your comic shops will see that something similar is happening with John Carter of Mars, with Edgar Rice Burroughs, where there is an ongoing comic called Deja Thoris that absolutely cannot be called John Carter of Mars. I don't think it can even be called Barsoom, because although there is an open copyright for a lot of that stuff, there's no open trademark, and a vigorous literary estate will certainly have you in court, and they will bankrupt you. And I guess Ablaze Comics doesn't want to do that. I have to imagine that before they came out with this first issue, and this isn't the first one, they did a run before this that has now been collected in a hardcover. I have to imagine that before they did any of this, they consulted with a phalanx of lawyers to make sure that they could do this without losing their shirt. And that's what this is. This is an English language translation of a French adaptation in color of Iron Shadows in the Moon, which was a Conan short story that Robert E. Howard wrote almost 100 years ago, in which Uh, the story starts with a woman running through a marsh. And she is the daughter of a king. She has been passed around as a sexual trophy. She is running from her latest abuser. And she's so desperate that she's plunged barefoot and unarmed and into a marsh that could be full of crocodiles or lions or tigers or whatever. And she's being pursued by Shah Ahmed, who is her abuser and who wants to reclaim her. He wants to take her back. And he finds her. He finds her in the marsh. See, she's running. But he calls to her, says that there's no way she can outpace his horse, and that she wants to take her back. She doesn't want to go back. See those little panels? You can see the odd lettering style and the slightly non-American cartoonish style of the artwork. You would sort of know, even if you hadn't researched it, you would sort of know that you're not maybe looking at something that was written and drawn in America. And in the story, he's about to have his way with her when he is interrupted. They are both interrupted by a call from the tall grass, from the weeds of the marsh. Conan. And it turns out that this horrible guy, this horrible Shah, had led a military force that wiped out a Kozaki band of warriors, of freebooting mercenaries, almost to a man. And didn't just destroy them in battle, but also maimed, mutilated, and tortured the ones who survived. And Conan was a part of that band. He, like she, dove into the marsh and managed to survive, living on swamp rats and not lighting fires so he wouldn't be noticed. Dreaming of vengeance. Because he knew some of those comrades, he knew. That's all they were. The introduction here it mentions that the Conan whose family has just been wiped out by this same master. That isn't true. Of course. It's his comrades in arms that have been wiped out. But he's still furious about it. And here, as he puts it, the gods of vengeance have delivered you into my hands by total chance. You are right here where I can exact my vengeance. Conan appears out of the marsh and is furious and wants to fight. Look at that. It looks like a Cro-Magnon man. His foe is at first mounted and is armored and is a fairly good swordsman, but it doesn't matter. Conan gets in, the short story makes a very vivid picture of it, gets in a chunk of a blow to his shoulder. And the man calls for quarter. He asks for mercy. He's been badly wounded, probably mortally wounded, but Conan doesn't care. He hacks him to pieces. And that leaves him with the girl, who is afraid of Conan, but she's more afraid of the man's comrades, who are obviously close behind. He's not alone. He outdistanced his own men, but they will show up. So she throws in her lot with Conan. She tells him her story about being sold by her father, the king. And he tells her the story of the slaughter on the battlefield. Really good stuff there. Nice, bright colors. They row and row until they get to a beautiful island. Inland shore island that are rumored to be fertile but uninhabited. And they meet, one of the little details that sticks out from the story, and that's always caught in adaptations, is that they meet a very old parrot in the jungle. And Conan says, what mysteries do you guard, wise devil? The grandfather of parrots. He must be 1,000 years old. And the parrot flies off, but as it's flying off, it says something. And it's not macaw. It's weird language. It sounds like a language that it has learned from hearing, but it's not anything a normal sound that a parrot would make. Conan doesn't recognize it, but he doesn't like it. It's foreboding. And it gets worse. As they trek into the jungle, look at that panel. Isn't that amazing? As they trek into the jungle, it becomes pretty clear to Conan, with his advanced barbarian senses, that they aren't alone. That something's in the jungle with them. He doesn't quite know what it is, but he's not happy. He doesn't want anything to happen to either one of them. And just as they are running from that danger, they encounter ruins. Oh, look at those ruins. Isn't that amazing? And they go in. He and the girl go into the ruins, where they find statues. Tall, black statues in vaguely man-shaped forms. They don't move. They're not in any one uniform position. It's a very strange thing. It creeps them out. And that is where this first issue ends. Now, any Conan fan knows the story of Iron Shadows in the Moon. You know what's going to happen, and you know how it's going to happen. But that doesn't matter. With an adaptation of Conan, that doesn't matter. What matters is how it's done. And this has been adapted before. I'm not, I have to confess, a big fan of this cover. It doesn't seem to work on a number of different compositional levels. It just doesn't seem to work. But nevertheless, I was very pleased with the pacing. I was very pleased with the Blaze Comics decision to reprint the story in the back. Never mind, you can take our word for it in terms of accuracy, but here's the story. You can just read it. Very pleased with that. That is a very good decision. I very much want the rest of this. But when I was reading it, I couldn't help but remember the last time I read it as an adaptation in a comic book. And it was 50 years ago in Savage Sword of Conan. Marvel Comics' first whack at the Robert E. Howard literary estate, where Roy Thomas, the writer, and John Buscema, the artist, wrote and drew the adventures of Conan just forever. Both in the monthly Conan the Barbarian magazine and also in this larger black and white magazine, The Savage Sword of Conan. And they adapted Iron Shadows in the Moon. And I thought, well, you know, it's a very old fart type thing to say I was better in my day. You know, I don't want to be that kind of comic book reader. I'm wide open to new interpretations, new ideas. And as you saw, some of the artwork there is beautiful. And this artist and writer probably are giving themselves a lot more room to adapt the whole story. Roy Thomas liked to get these things done in one issue of Savage Sword of Conan. So, of course, I didn't want to think that. I went back and looked at it. And I want to show you, because I honestly do think, as much as I love this issue, I honestly do think this is a case where the original adaptation in Marvel Comics was simply better. I honestly do think that. I know that's not good, but I want to show it to you. For instance, that incredible moment when Conan shows up out of the reeds. This is that moment in that original comic. This is John Buscema artwork with fantastic cross-hatching inks by Alfredo Alcala, one of Buscema's best inkers, but a very slow worker, so, you know, didn't get this in every issue. But that is just a better composition. It's more effective for us to see the crazed look of madness in Conan's eyes than for him to be a shadow figure. And then they fight, and it's a direct homage. It's described pretty clearly that the Shah takes a blow to the shoulder, so you really can't mess around with that. Conan then hacks him to pieces. It takes a little longer in the comic book. The girl throws in her lot with him, and they go rowing off. They tell their stories. This is Buscema's rendering of that battlefield. Even without color, I'd say it's more effective. And they row all night, and the girl slumbers and feels almost like they're floating among the stars because she can see the reflections in the water. It's a neat little detail. Roy Thomas expands on it. It's absent in the Sumerian, but it's absolutely beautiful in this issue. Look at that. That is just lovely. And when they get to the island, the same thing happens. They encounter, you know, the ancient parrot, and Conan has a worry about what might be in the forest and chasing them. And they travel through the forest to the ruins. I won't go any further than this. They go to the ruins, and you saw the introduction piece here for when they encounter the ruins in this comic, in the color comic. This is the introduction page for when they encounter the ruins in this 50-year-old comic. I know art is subjective. I know we all have our opinions on these things, but that is just better. It's just better. And it's not, this isn't a case of, well, you know, the French writer and artist have more time or more space or lesser censorship. This is just a moment that is better done. It is better achieved by this artist and this inker than by that artist and that inker. Look at the shadow that falls just over part of the temple. Just look at the detail there. That's amazing. It is just plain better, in my opinion. Even if we go back to the fight scene, let me show you just one little detail. It's not just over and done. The fight scene has little details in it that repay. This is when the fight is going badly. The Shah asks for a quarter. He doesn't get it. Conan hacks him again. But look at that. Look at the sun there. It's vertical lines broken up by two smudges of clear space. It's not a delineated circle. It's meant to imply the heat and humidity of the swamp. That is just wonderfully done. Little details like that, I think, I don't know anything about the creators of the Sumerian. I have no idea. They did a good enough job to hook me. But I don't think that the writer or the artist have anything like the talent level of Roy Thomas and John Buscema. Granted, both of them were at the top of their form when they did this thing, but still, I wonder if I'm going to be thinking that. And I seem to remember having the same impression of that uh, about the Sumerian adaptation of Queen of the Black Coast. Uh, I'll have to get to that. I don't know that I have those issues, but anyway, I'm going to stop. They also encounter these statues, and I have to think again that this is better done in the color issue from the Sumerian. We see the statues from a huge distance with Conan and Olivia, also tiny figures, as the whole of the scene. Buscema instead decides to break it down so that she is horrified by how lifelike the statue looks. That's the first look. We don't realize until the next page that they're just statues, that they're all just standing there under cobwebs. Before that, it looks like a real person and slightly inhuman person. I don't know. I just think I know that's very reductive to do, but I think that a lot of the artistic and writing choices are just better in that one from 50 years ago. That's one way or another. One way or another, I still had a wonderful time with these three first issues. So I thought I would make a comic book video. I haven't made one of those in quite some time, unless you count my ongoing read-along of Batman Dark Knight Returns, which I'm doing with Matthew at Mayberry Book Club. You are all invited to come along for that. That is a comic book video, of course, but these are floppy issues, and they hold a place in my heart. So we'll see. Maybe there'll be one next week. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.